Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
How nice, people all waving.
Word echt gek van het geluid, jongen.
Oh,
Procent.nl zat ook de hele tijd aan. Mij doet het niet.
Ik zit er ook zo ingelogd in de eerste van mij te spreken. Ik heb helemaal niet microfoon niet. Zie ik wel even jij.
Oops. Marielle, should I wait? Oh, Ruth was gonna get us started, or
Yes, well,
wait another minute or so?
yes, well, just wait 1 minute because, well, we have now, we're expecting some more people.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
I think we just start and then we'll see who's joining us. Welcome everybody on behalf of the LITSE committee from the annual summit, this year online. I want to ask you if you can mute yourself and put your cameras on, then we can see you, but we don't hear any noise. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. A special welcome to Dorsey Sherman. One of the advantages of this online meetings is that we can broadcast from everywhere around the world. So Dorsey is on the other side of the world. So very welcome, Dorsey. And she is doing a workshop with us on coaching for compliance or compassion. Dorsey,
Okay.
the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm thrilled for the opportunity. So my name is Dorsey Sherman, as Ruth said, and I own a coaching and consulting company called Model Consulting. And I'd like to introduce myself first by sharing my strengths. So number one is that I appreciate beauty, excellence, and skilled performance in all domains of life. Number two is my strength is critical thinking and open-mindedness, thinking through things, examining them from all aspects is an important part of who I am. And 3 is that I have high social intelligence, which means I'm aware of kind of the motives and feelings of other people. So I decided to use these strengths as an introduction for 2 reasons. First, I want to highlight the importance of being aware of your strengths and leveraging them to achieve the results that you want, and kind of be an example of that awareness to others. And second, I want to tell you that those strengths fit into today's topic because I've spent a lot of time studying, practicing, and thinking about what excellence in coaching looks like. And I'm really passionate about kind of bringing and talking about it with you today. So the word coach is very ubiquitous nowadays, at least in America. I don't know if it is in the Netherlands, but it is in America. People say that they're coaching a lot. At my kids' let me back up a minute. At their school, the teachers have coaches when they're learning new curriculum. The person we use for a plumber has a ride-along coach that helps him with service calls. Bosses and leaders say that they're coaching poor performers. And of course, they're lean coaches and kata coaches and life coaches. And are we all talking about the same thing? So for me, I kind of broke it out into these categories of what I hear a lot. One is just the word tell. So I put this under coaching because people call this coaching all the time. They say, you know, they're really conveying information, transferring knowledge. It could be around education, addressing inappropriate behavior, dealing with a safety concern, and that's all called coaching. You know, when I was calling myself a lean coach, I was really focused on transferring knowledge, telling someone how to improve a process, working on an A3, even doing it for them. I was calling all of that coaching. Feedback is often called coaching. So we say when, at least in the US, you kind of observe like some inappropriate behavior and someone will say, ooh, like he really needs some coaching. And then mentoring. So mentoring is called coaching, but in this case, the mentor is really giving advice. They're kind of more senior or experienced. And, but to me, it's a distinction from coaching. What I'm going to talk about today is something called coaching for compliance. And so I talked to Marielle and Ruth before we started, and they said that word compliance is not very common in the Dutch language. So what I mean is the compliance is around like rules and standards. Coaching for compliance is kind of trying to get another person to do what you want them to do, kind of policing a little bit, drilling down to a problem, offering advice. The focus is on the problem, not the person. And it can be effective at helping someone with like a predetermined goal. But when it comes to behavioral change, even skill development, things like being a better leader, the strategy is less successful. Indeed, it can trigger a stress response that doesn't allow for learning. So there's also coaching for skill development, coaching kata for those of you that are practicing Toyota Kata. This is also our music teachers, athletic coaches. They're looking for performance in a specific area. So for Toyota Kata, if you're a kata coach, you're looking for performance in scientific thinking, that people are focused on facts and data, they're experimenting, they're understanding their current condition, that kind of thing. But it can really be similar to coaching for compliance. So I'm going to kind of tease them apart a little bit today. And finally, coaching for compassion. So I'm getting certified as a leadership coach at Case Western Reserve University here in the US. And this term was, so this university where I'm going, they have one of the only coaching research labs, which I think is so fascinating. They actually study the impact of coaching. Oh, someone's in the waiting room. I'll just admit them. So they actually study the effects of coaching on individuals and also different types of coaching and what works and what doesn't. So coaching for compassion is really about helping someone find their own way. And I put own in red. So it's like, it's kind of lighting the fire within, building, pulling out ideas from someone else. It's the job of the coach in this realm is to trust, to listen, to appreciate, and to let the coachee do 80% of the talking. It's really focused on unlocking human potential and enabling people. Another kind of way to think about coaching and differences of coaching from other ways of helping is this grid that asks a couple of questions. So the first is, what does the learning experience look like on this x-axis? On the left side is teaching, or telling, directing, versus are people learning through discovery? Are they learning through reflection and thinking through something themselves? The same thing on the y-axis, who is setting the agenda? Is the coach setting the agenda? Or is the coachee or the customer setting the agenda? And that kind of divides up the behavior into these different quadrants. So it's just something interesting to think about, is like, where are you most of the time? And how does that affect the development of the person you're coaching? So just one of the fundamental philosophies of Lean is that different processes lead to different results. And so depending on your methodology, you may have a different result with the person you're coaching. And so coaching has become so popular, and that word is so ubiquitous. There's all kinds of articles. The Harvard Business Review did this article, and it was called "Most Managers Think They're Good at Coaching." And so they did a survey to say, are you successful at coaching your employees? Well, everyone said yes. Like 80% was like, yes, absolutely. But when they asked the employees the same question, it's really, managers are telling people what to do. When they actually study the behavior of what managers call coaching, it's really more like telling. So I'm really interested in kind of this intersection, or the different parts of coaching for skill development, coaching for compliance, coaching for compassion, and how they overlap. And really what I think is interesting is, how do we, the goal of most coaching is learning, growth, and development. Like, that's pretty much across the board. So how do we do it most effectively in order to get the most, how do we maximize learning, growth, and development and get as effective as we can possibly be? Because that's really the goal, is to have individuals and teams in our organizations that are engaged, motivated, interested, committed, and also willing to learn and grow and develop individually. So coaching for compliance, to talk about that a little bit more, it's really compliance to standards. Even when it's well-intentioned, the research really shows it can create a defensive response from the person being coached. And so people tend to experience a stress response and negative emotion associated with this. So it can actually activate something called the sympathetic nervous system, which triggers all these hormonal responses, and it actually shuts down our capacity to learn. People go into survival mode. You may have heard of the term fight or flight. What happens in our brains at this point is that creativity, openness to new ideas are diminished, and the likelihood to make or sustain behavioral change is extremely low. And yet this is the default style of teaching, parenting, athletic coaching, doctor-patient, performance reviews. On the other side, this coaching for compassion is kind of about focusing on strengths. This ratio of positive to negative as being 5-to-1, tapping into internal motivation, and focus, I really like this, on a positively framed aspiration, which it's very different than what we do in the Lean world a lot of time, where we start with problems or waste or what's wrong with the process, as opposed to this kind of methodology, which is really about a positively framed aspiration. So my journey, when I started working as a Lean coach, and I was really doing facilitation of projects, I was doing Kaizen events, A3s, and the events were relatively infrequent. There were more projects done maybe every couple of months. And so we know now that skill development really happens in short, frequent cycles and not in these infrequent bursts of activity. So we were really I was focused on results and getting improved outcomes. And whether or not someone was learning anything, I wasn't clear. I didn't really know. As I moved into Kata coaching, it's really a very intentional focus on the learning and development of the person you're coaching. And so there's, for those of you that are practicing, I know Marielle is an expert Kata coach. Of course, it's not about criticism or control. It's really about allowing failed experiments, and the coach focuses on how and not what. But I would say despite this, very well intentioned and kind of despite this intention of the coaching kata, I've seen coaches get very focused on rules and what I would say goes into compliance kind of coaching. So rules like this, well, you should always go to the Gemba first before you do your current condition. And why did you choose that for a challenge? Or you're missing a process metric. Here's what you don't have. There should be no verbs in the target condition. I used to say that. Your data is 3 months old. Your target condition doesn't have an achieve by date. And so this is where when we get focused on rules, it can turn into kind of this policing mentality. And actually there's this model around how we learn. The Japanese word is shuhari, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's this, in English is follow, detach, and fluency. So we start by the strict adherence, and that's actually what the kata is this strict adherence to those coaching kata questions. These yeah, the intention is to follow those very strictly, and that's how you teach. And then from there, we bend the rules, and then we have fluency. We transcend the rules. But I think people get stuck, or even early coaches get really stuck in following the rules, and it kind of turns into this policing mentality. So what's wrong with that, though? I mean, we can all relate to athletic coaches and teachers who are not compassionate at all. They're maybe quite harsh, and they get results, right? I mean, people learn. In America, we have all kinds of like examples of football coaches and basketball coaches that like scream and yell, and they do get outcomes. I mean, they win. So it's interesting. The problem is that it doesn't really lead to sustained growth and development. Like you can get these short-term bursts in performance, but in the long term, it doesn't improve performance over time. It tends to be like a finite experience. So I would argue at work, we're looking for a more long-term growth and development. And so what happens is fascinating. What happens in the brain is that any corrective coaching or negative feedback can create defensiveness. And so there was this, the Harvard Business Review referenced this study where they did imaging studies of two people's brain, two groups. So there was one group was given one group was given positive feedback and coaching based on their strengths, and one was told what was wrong and what they needed to fix. And in the brain that was getting negative feedback, the fight or flight system lit up, and the fight or flight system lit up, and the brain narrows its activity. So the negative emotion that's created by what's experienced as criticism literally inhibits access to neural circuits and invokes cognitive, emotional, and perceptual impairment. So I just want to say that again. It creates cognitive, emotional, and perceptual impairment. So we're literally trying to teach someone. The whole goal is learning and growth and development, and yet we have cognitive impairment. So it's like the opposite of what we're trying to create, which I think is so fascinating. So it really focusing on shortcomings and problems can actually impair learning. So some examples, just because of time, I won't go through all of these, but as I start talking about this topic, people have told me so many stories of negative experiences being coached. So just the other day, a friend was telling me that her coach was saying, no, you can only have one process metric and one outcome metric in your improvement activity. And she said, well, but for my process, I'm measuring different things. I'm experimenting with different things. And he said, no, absolutely not. And she said, why? Well, just because I want you to go narrow and deep and only focus on this one thing. And she didn't understand and ended up kind of feeling really awkward and uncomfortable. People talk about being coached in front of peers, not knowing the answers, being really embarrassed. Someone literally said, Dorsey, I just got off my last coaching cycle and I wanted to cry. My first time at KataCon, coaches were criticizing their learners for all they were doing wrong, and I felt intimidated. So it's interesting as I bring up this topic, like everyone kind of has a story of actually having a coach where you felt really embarrassed and uncomfortable and a lot of negative emotion. So the other thing, I guess let me pause. Were there any questions? Anything in the chat, Marielle or Ruth, that I should highlight before I keep going?
No, not yet, Dorsey.
Okay, I'm
So
just gonna,
feel free
no
to
question.
put your questions in the chat.
Yeah.
If you have some questions, just drop them in the chat.
okay, I'm gonna keep going just because of time here. Okay, so early lean in the 90s and early 2000s, the focus was really on the lean experts are the ones that do the coaching. Everything is handled by the lean experts. But now, really the ideal, and for sure in the coaching kata, it's the idea that the bosses, the leaders, are actually ones doing the coaching for improvement. They own the process, so they should be developing their own people. So, but what's really interesting, at least in America, is the level of engagement at work is not very high. 31% of American employees are engaged at work. And 14% are actively disengaged and 54% are not engaged, meaning they're kind of unattached and they don't put in a lot of extra energy or passion or anything into their work. And so as well, managers account for the variance in engagement scores. So we're kind of putting managers and leaders in this place of doing coaching, and yet they're 70% of the reason we have disengagement. So it seemed to me like a problem that we're asking leaders to coach when they're the reason we have low engagement. So this is some research out of Case Western that really shows how relationships lead to results. So this term leader-member exchange, all it means is the relationship between a leader and an employee. And when that's good, that creates this sense of perceived organizational support, which means that an employee feels like the company cares about them. And because of this norm of reciprocity, and when people feel taken care of, they want to take care of the company, those two things lead to engagement, satisfaction, commitment, retention, and effort. And that engagement leads to organizational performance. So when people want to get better results, they often focus on changing that bottom line, but it actually goes, all the root of it is this leader-member exchange in the relationship. That's actually what causes and drives organizational performance. And so,
Dorsey?
Yeah.
Dorsey, there's a question.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Can you please describe again what high social intelligence is exactly?
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you. So emotional intelligence is comprised of a couple different things, and one is self-awareness, but one is awareness of others. So part of having emotional intelligence is my intelligence about understanding and recognizing the emotions in other people. So that would be social intelligence, if that makes sense. It's part of kind of one of the parts of emotional intelligence is understanding the emotions of others. Okay, hopefully that helps. So moving on is this idea of emotional contagion. So just like COVID-19, just like a bad cold, emotions are actually contagious. And so having a conversation with a colleague or friend that's hopeful and exciting and passionate actually creates that feeling in yourself. At the same time, when we experience a boss, a leader, a coach who is frustrated, angry, annoyed, that mood can downgrade the mood in ourselves and can actually spread throughout an organization. And so one of the oldest laws in psychology is that any increase in worry or anxiety actually erode mental abilities. So it makes us less effective. It makes our brain work less effectively when we have anxiety or worry. And so on the opposite, positive emotions are similarly contagious, but this research on positivity goes far beyond kind of this greeting card idea of look on the bright side, there's always a silver lining. This positivity, so research from Barbara Fredrickson is called this broaden and build theory. She's really proven that positive emotions do more than feel good. They actually are astonishingly useful. They change how our brain operates. Specifically, you can see options. So when you're in a positive state of mind, you have creativity, you see options, you focus on goals, you can find solutions to complex problems, and you really trust in the good intentions of others. Her research proved that positive emotions broaden people's ideas of what's possible and kind of open our awareness to a wider range of thoughts and ideas. And specifically these 10 is what her research is about, in that she knows that joy sparks the interest to be creative, interest sparks openness and creativity, exploration and learning. And so the impact on healthcare improvement, Kata coaching and skill development, that by sparking, igniting, maintaining, and mining for positive emotion could not be more important, because it literally can lead to you know, innovation, experimentation, and commitment to change. So I referenced that Harvard Business Review study that looked at the MRIs of different people's brains. When they looked at the brains of people where they were coached, focused on their strengths, focused on positive aspirations, focused on goals, they found that the fight or flight did not light up. In fact, the parasympathetic nervous system lit up, and it led to it was called adult neurogenesis. So they actually found the growth of new neurons, a sense of well-being, and cognitive, emotional, and perceptual openness. So how do I bring coaching for compassion? And I'm sorry, we're running out of time. How do I bring that into Lean and Kata coaching? Like, how do I translate all this into my work? So the first thing, a trusting and resonant relationship between the coach and the learner is absolutely key. And second, does the learner really care about the goal you're striving for? Sometimes we put people in a place of working on improvement without even realizing they have no interest or passion for the goal you're trying to achieve. And is the coach committed to learning and development instead of results? I'm just gonna skim quickly over that. And when I did this presentation before, someone said, isn't it just about intention? Can I be compassionate? Can I be nice and still coach for compliance? And I think the danger there is around making sure your learner or your coachee is motivated, interested, you know, and just because you have a good intention doesn't mean you have that impact on the individual you're coaching. They could, just because you have an intention that's focused on learning and development doesn't mean that's how it's impacting that person. So I guess the questions I invite you to consider, and I wish we had more time to discuss, are your coachees or the people you're coaching experiencing more positive or negative emotion during your coaching, and how do you know? How do you think those emotions are impacting their ability to learn? And what about your own emotions? So part of recognizing the emotions in others is knowing your own. Do you experience negative emotion when you're coaching? And does it show? How does it show? And how does it impact your actions? So I'm sorry, I'd love to take questions if we have time, and I'll defer to Ruth and Marielle.
Yes, there's a question, Dorsey, and I think we have couple of minutes left.
Okay.
And the question is, would you say it's never a good idea to give negative feedback?
No, that's such a good question. No, I think it's a dosage issue is what I would say. So in that first slide, I talked about a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative. And I think, and I think even the word negative, it's like, you know, how do you frame that so you can still focus on the teaching and kind of overemphasize the positive with a 5-to-1 ratio. So no, it's not that you never give negative feedback.
I think we have some time left for one short question, if there is any. Does anyone have a question left?
Or I'd love to hear your answers to these questions if you've thought about, you know, how your coachees are experiencing positive or negative emotion. Look in the chat too here. Oh, they're all in Dutch. Okay. Oh, the models are very useful. Good. What is important to focus on in a disturbed leader membership relationship? staying positive isn't always leading to results. I mean, I guess what I would say is that you probably aren't going to be effective at coaching someone if there's not a good relationship. I think that's my main point. I don't necessarily have like the solution to fix all relationships. It's more about knowing that that relationship is the key to engagement, which is the key to performance. Yeah, and I agree. You can't just stay positive. That won't necessarily change a relationship. But it's more about like awareness that coaching, it's going to have a hard time coaching for learning, development, and growth without a positive relationship. Sometimes positive feedback feels unnatural for some people and they see it as unreal. What's your opinion about that, and what's the best way to react on that? Positive feedback feels unnatural for some people. Oh, like giving positive feedback? Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a practice for one. You know, and I think it has to be for sure like focused on very much specifics. So not like good job and that was great and you're doing great and kind of attaboy is what we might say in America, versus what specifically did they do well. I really appreciate how you understood your current condition, how you went back and got more data. This is, you know, I guess if you're uncomfortable giving positive feedback, it's something I would highly recommend practicing. I guess that's what I would say, because it's so important to people's learning and growth and development. That's kind of the role of a coach. So I would say practice, like anything.
Thank you, Dorsey.
Pleasure.
I think we have to stop end the workshop right now because we want to give people a break.
Yes.
Thank you, Dorsey. I read in the reactions that you made people think and that they reflect on their own coaching style and things they were doing. So thank you for that. For the Dutchies, we have a break and we start again at 14:45, 15:45. Ik zou zeggen, neem even lekker pauze. Ga even bewegen, even van het computerscherm weg. En dan beginnen we weer om 14:45.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.